Hello, welcome to Tea with Mali. Today we have Julie Jakopic. She is the founder and CEO of iLead Strategies. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
We talked off camera prior to the show about your background, and as I was reading your bio, I was trying to figure out where do I start the show, what do I tell people about your background? It's so diverse. So I'd love for you to kind of lead us down the path professionally, how you got to founding this organization.
You know, it's funny, sometimes people think I do lots of different things and it's all very confusing, and I actually think I only really do one thing. I just do it in a lot of places. What I do is help people get clear about what they want and figure out how they're going to get there and what relationships they need to build in order to do that. So, but I've had a chance to do that building nonprofit organizations. When I first got out of college, I ran a 24-hour crisis intervention program. I put myself through college as one of the youngest managers in the country for Estee Lauder, doing makeup, and it was really fun. So I did sort of the private sector, I did the nonprofit sector. I spent a lot of years serving public sector agencies who serve low-income families, have been a private sector contractor in that world. But really what I've always done is just help people get clear and then figure out how to actually get what they want. So for me, it feels like I do the same thing everywhere.
So what led you to actually define it in that way?
Lots of people asking.
Yeah?
I still don't understand what you do. And it's funny, as a small business owner, that whole getting clear about niche thing is actually freeing. I think a lot of small business owners, when they first start their business, anybody who will pay is in their tribe.
Right.
If you've got a checkbook and there's money, I'll take you. And ironically, it wasn't until I got really clear about the change, that really what I'm doing is helping people do change, and that I focus on leaders. It wasn't until I actually got clear about that I could tell anybody what I did. And it actually is freeing because then the right people show up. So A, I work with people I love. I feel honored to support. B, I have a good time. And C, it somehow being clear means the right people are in the room. So are there people I would love to work with that don't fit? Yes. Do I sometimes work with them? Absolutely. But that clarity for me actually was really important. I'm not sure if that totally answers what you were going after.
It did. And I want to go deep a little bit about that niching, right? Because, I mean, when you start a business and you are starting off and you really just want to, get out the gates running. And the most important thing for you is the sense of, I have to survive, I have to make ends meet, I have to keep this going. And so we have a tendency to say, yes, I want to help everyone. And yes, I'm going to say yes to every opportunity because it's an opportunity. I feel blessed to have it, so I'm going to say yes, yes, yes. Well, what happens when you say yes to everything, even if it's not truly in alignment with your sole purpose, your mission for the business? Did you struggle with niching? Did you actually say, do I have to niche because isn't that going to limit me?
Well, and ironically, I would have to tell you that's a lifelong affliction. Long before I started my business, for a long time, I worked with agencies that serve low-income families, and some of that was on the advocacy side. Actually, at a point, it was direct service, and typically, people in that work specialize. Right? They work in mental health, or they work in child welfare, or they work in substance abuse, and I was always much more interested in the system. So I wouldn't pick. So this pressure to pick thing has been there my whole career. But what my career's really been about is about where those things blend. So it was extra hard as a small business owner to say no to anything. And I think it takes a couple things. A, if you don't want to work 24/7, you got to be clear. You just have to. Secondly, when I take on clients that don't match, A, it's 3 times the energy to serve them. And that's 3 times the energy going into a place that's not actually building my business. So you actually lose opportunities when you're not clear.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So if and then you get bogged down in a big project, potentially a big project that you don't love, and you're saying no to things you love because you've got this thing. And so I also am probably not strange for folks in our world or for folks who are probably participating in this show or even watching this show, but in the business world, I am a little strange. My goal is impact. My goal is change, and then I have to figure out how to make a living doing it. Mm-hmm. I am not a serial entrepreneur who gets up in the morning and goes, "Oh, I know how I can make money." No, I get up in the morning going, "I know how I can change stuff." Now, how do I make that work? and how do I fit that in? So.
Why did you choose leaders? Because when we go through, and I work with a lot of small businesses, and when we go through the mapping process and we decide what's your demographic, who do you want to target, let's niche a little bit, right? Since we're on this topic of niching. There's so many ways you can go. There's such a huge market in the world of things and people that you can do and service. Why leaders for you?
I think, so there's probably 3 ways I want to answer that question. In the coaching world, most of my coach colleagues focus on entrepreneurs, many of whom are what I would refer to as corporate refugees, right? They were leading at work, leading at home, no time for themselves, exhausted, woke up one day and went and said, oh, is that all there is? And went and started their own business. There's 2 problems with that. One is that not everybody should be an entrepreneur. Agreed. Number 1. And number 2, if we gut corporate, if we gut all of the major organizations and take all of the creative leaders out of them, if you thought it was bad before, you have no idea what you're getting into. So I didn't want to go down the entrepreneur path.
Right.
I mean, I served some entrepreneurs, but it wasn't really the right niche. I am a change agent person. I've spent a lot of years here in DC helping public officials change their organizations. A couple of the people I coach are elected officials. It's about the change thing. And for me, I get a little piece of that. So it's really about leveraging relationships and leveraging the opportunity to reach more and more people. So, I'm right now working with several folks who are mid-career and in fact more junior. But so we should also talk about what I mean by leaders. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. Let's go and define that.
So at the broadest point, if you have ever had to convince other people to join you in something, you are a leader. If that means that you got the PTA moms to do something, if that means you were elected president of your junior high school, if that means, because leaders lead everywhere. And so it's not about, are you a CEO, although that's clearly a set of relationships. It's really about how you live your life. And for me, it's about reach. So if you're someone who reaches others and I can support you, then I in turn actually end up reaching all those people.
Right.
So that's kind of the path.
Got it. So now you've chosen leaders and you've chosen change. Change.
I know.
Change is a big deal for you. Being a change agent, seeing change in the world, seeing change inside organizations. Why?
I think there's probably a lot of reasons. I came to this life probably as someone who was always curious and always thinks there's a way we can make things a little bit better. I've lived through a lot of change. I am someone who, it's back to that sort of choosing thing. I've always sort of had friends over here and friends over there, and where do those meet, and what would happen if they touched, and how would the world be different? Number 1. Number 2, while I loved playing makeup artist and that work, and it was creative and it was fun, I've always been more driven about how we make people's lives better, because I think there's a vast way we can improve those. So it could be, so I spent a lot of time working to make sure that low-income families had access to services and jobs. But it's also been about helping people who lead those agencies have access to a life. Right. And so I think I've always been a little dissatisfied and always seen a way you could make it a little bit better. And because I've lived through a lot of change, I've always been relatively comfortable in the middle of the roaring sea, right? So it's always been a place I could actually be comfortable. And we live in a world where everything's changing all the time.
Yeah.
So
more so now than ever. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's go back to the business aspect for a second. iLead strategies. When you first decided, okay, I'm going to launch a business, what was the true motivation behind that? Like, did you have an aha that said, okay, I'm going to go do this now? Or were you led to it? Or like you said, a lot of people encouraged you to do it because you were helping them anyway?
They say what we resist persists. So maybe 10 years before I started my own business, I wanted to do it, and I was dissuaded by folks who were concerned about, would I be okay? But it kind of kept cropping up. And then I built other people's businesses So I kind of knew how to do that.
Right.
And I also was working in a firm that was not the easiest place in the world to be. And I was hiring people to do things that I knew I did better, but couldn't figure out how to have the time to do. And I missed the training pieces. And I also sort of figured if I failed, I could go get a job.
Right.
So let's try it. And did that in 2007. Wow. Not exactly the right moment. But I'm still here.
But you're still here.
I'm still here, and business is changing and growing and having more impact and serving people who really are making a difference, whether they're, working on issues about vaccination and seed production to make sure we address hunger worldwide, or they're working in a particular agency trying to make systems move more smoothly and more effectively for folks and for the kids that they serve, or they're, building businesses that are in the business of making life better for people, and I get to go out and play with them and help them make them more successful faster.
So iLead Strategies is what type of company? Like, what would people categorize it as? How would you like people to see iLead Strategies? Where do you, what kind of programs do you offer as a company? Because I know your personal brand, you do tons and tons of things, again, around change, around making life better, but for the company itself.
So iLead Strategies is an organizational development and leadership development firm that helps leaders explore and get clear about their goals and then drive change either in their lives or their organizations. So people either work with me individually or in projects. They work with me individually. It's usually coaching around a particular goal, although all of us come to the table, so it doesn't mean that's the only thing we talk about. And if we work on projects, from a project perspective, it's really deciding where you want to go and pulling the resources and relationships to make that change happen, whether that's a reorganization, whether that's adding a new line of business, whatever. So those are sort of the two broad buckets. But mostly it's about strategy and clarity and relationship building.
That's great. Now let's focus on you.
Okay.
You have traveled and worked with many different organizations, and you love speaking. You do a lot of presentations and speaking. You even spoke or shared a stage with the president at some point. So let's say that for a little later, because I do want to know what that felt like for you and what the experience was like. But what does speaking do for you personally, and what does it do for the business and the brand? And I ask this question specifically because I do have a lot of clients who are business owners who are wonderful in an intimate setting, but they're not necessarily convinced that they should be on the stage, that they should be speaking. And so I want to kind of have you share the pros of speaking. And if you have some cons, that's fine too, but what works for you as a speaker?
Okay, so I'm a redhead with a big mouth. So clearly I'm not uncomfortable standing out. And I think for a lot of people, that's actually the hard part, is simply being the center of attention. But I actually think a lot of it is practice. If you haven't been on a bike in a long time and you get on a bike, you're a little afraid you're going to fall. If you get on stage a lot, it gets more comfortable. I think I've always been reasonably comfortable as a speaker, but I was a terrible actress because I would crack up laughing. I thought it was funny, right? So I haven't always been comfortable in every stage setting. But it's also, if your issue is impact and you want to reach more people, it's just a whole lot faster to talk to a whole audience than it is to make 50 phone calls. We are in a world where people are overwhelmed with information. Most of us take the junk mail and it goes straight in the trash. We don't read it. Unless it's a really cool color or has a fabulous photo on it, we don't even know what it was. So there's a lot of noise, and what shifts is story. What draws people to, people don't hire our resumes. They get other people to pay for us by our resumes, but they hire us because they like us. And so it's about being seen and known. And one of the things I think a small business owner has to get used to is that you are no longer in the back room. Your job actually is being out front. So you reach more people, and actually the president's story is probably the perfect example, because really, you know how much we prepared for today. We talked about a few questions. I have no prepared remarks. Most of what I've said, I've never said before. So, and as a speaker, I was comfortable with that. But you get told you get 5 minutes, We are going to yank you off the stage in 5 minutes. And your job is to get people who've been standing around for 3 hours excited.
Wow.
Okay, they were going to get to see the president.
Yeah,
but,
no pressure at all.
And so I, for once, actually really, really practiced. I knew exactly what I was going to say. I practiced it 100 million times. And I won't say that I always do that, but but it was an anxiety-producing situation. So I really knew my stuff. That helps. And for me, if you gave me cue cards with every word on them, I would stumble through them. High points is all I can do. So for me, I had to kind of learn what I was going to say. Secondly, the most important thing I was going to do was ask people to do something at the end. So I had to get it into the 5 minutes, or I wasn't going to get to do the part that mattered most. And then, oh yeah, there's this other guy on the stage.
It's not important at all.
No, yeah, no. And I haven't spent years working in the political world. So, I wasn't honored or whatever. And I will tell you that the most important thing I also learned to do, and I think small business owners need to do that, particularly in this area where we live in a town of heads. Most of us live from the shoulders up. We get paid for our brains, occasionally for our hearts. We're not in our bodies. And probably the most important tip I would give anybody speaking, and what made that day work for me, is I was totally in my body. I spent time, I'm short, that has good points and bad points. The good point is I can go in the ladies' room and do anything in a bathroom stall and no one has any idea what I'm doing. And I can deep breathe and feel my feet on the floor and spread my arms and figure out my space and really get into me. The other challenge, and the reason that was really important, is that when we were backstage and arranging to get on the stage, the Secret Service guy is coming out and looking at me. Okay, I have no purse. I don't know how to shoot a gun. I'm pretty safe. And he's doing, He comes out and he said, "You're the first speaker. You're short." Like I didn't already know. And so you can't use the podium. I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "The podium's set for the president. I need you to go to the MC, who was already speaking,
right,
and get his microphone. And then you can't go behind the podium because I don't think anybody will be able to see you." And if I hadn't already been in my body, I wouldn't have been able to do any of that. I'd have been so anxious over, what do you mean, that I wouldn't have been able to do it. And one of the reasons we use podiums is there's something to hide behind. So essentially I got told, you get nothing to hide behind. You can bring no notes because you got to hold that microphone. And, oh yeah, you have to disrupt your routine. If I hadn't been in my body, we've all had that experience where you graduate from school or you're in a wedding and you don't even really know you were there. I actually remember all of it because I was actually fully present. And that being present is actually what makes speaking doable.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. I really want to talk a little bit more about being in your body, because I don't think people truly understand what that means. So when you say being in your body, what are some of the steps that you do to help you center yourself and be really present, be really aware of your physical presence? Because I think the excitement, I mean, every speaker has the butterflies, especially if you're going to be on a stage talking about something you're so passionate about. How do you kind of calm that in that very few moments before, lights come on and it's time?
I do a couple things. I love these shoes. Can you actually see them? But they're really fun. They are my favorite pair of shoes. I wouldn't wear them on the stage that day because I can fall off these. You want to feel the floor under your feet. You actually want to be firmly on the ground. And you can go anywhere and do that. You want to look at the space and realize that it's all yours. You want to breathe deeply. And around here, nobody breathes properly. We're all trying to be skinny. And so we think, it's a deep breath. It's not a deep breath. It's really breathing in through your nose, really filling your diaphragm. And so that actually gets you in touch with your body. So for people who think that's all woo-woo, when you fill your diaphragm, you actually massage the organs inside your abdomen. It actually helps ground you. And as women, our center of gravity is in our hips. It is not here. So it's really important to actually feel that feeling your feet thing, getting into your body and breathing properly, is actually the key to a lot of things. It's a key to doing well in meetings too.
What do you love talking about when you're on stage? What topics do you really key in on?
There's what's coming out of my mouth and what I'm trying to do, and those aren't always the same thing, right? So it's hard to answer. What I'm usually trying to do, the most rewarding thing to me as a speaker has nothing to do with business. It has to do with a shift in energy, and has to do with people waking up. It has to do with people getting it. And so often I'm teaching people the don't await it, create it framework that I use in all the work in iLead strategies to help people get what they want. But I had a lot of fun 2 weeks ago doing a workshop on neuroscience of success, how to add 11 minutes to your life. So over the course of an hour, I took people through things that I think a lot of us have always suspected, but the science now supports, about how to live your life in a way that's successful, that actually enables you to lead well and live well.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned don't await it, create it. That's a system that you built. Talk more about that, and what's the purpose? What's the purpose of that system?
Well, it came actually out of designing a strategic planning framework for organizations that we jokingly called Julie in a box at one point. Really thinking about how you could do a modular process, so not spend 3 days in the woods, and how you could build a strategic plan that was about the organization, not the divisions or departments within it, so that those divisions and departments are all moving towards the same plan. Had a lot of fun doing it, had some funding to bring teams together. And when the funding went away, what I had learned, one of the things I had learned was that the magic was in the questions. And thought, let's see what happens if we teach this as a personal development tool. And so it started out as 90-minute workshops, which were never long enough, and then it was half-day workshops, which were never long enough. And now I still do day-long workshops, but the big deal is that I do a 3-day event for women, and doing it again in January, to basically bring people together, create a safe space to dream, and really sort of figure out that impossible thing you want and a path to getting there, and along the way learn some tools to always be able to do that. My favorite way to procrastinate as a kid was to alphabetize my rather extensive record collection. Paper due, must need to straighten out the albums, right? Pull them all off, have these piles on the floor, all of that sort of stuff. Little did I know that someone a little older than me had said, wouldn't it be cool if I could carry all that around on a device no bigger than my hand that we all now own? I can no longer use that as an excuse. And I got to tell you, I have 40 consecutive days of music on my iPod. So it was a great procrastination tool, but I'm trying to think about what somebody would have said when that guy said, what if I could carry this all around with me all the time? They'd have laughed. And yet he did it, and we all depend on it. And I think creating the space for people to have that size dream is really important. But the original process was called Planning for Results. Very clear, very bureaucratic, really sexy, not. And so I had to kind of come up with a name for what I was doing with this framework. And I came up with the phrase, don't await it, create it. And part of it was just fun. Part of that is actually about, we all have dreams. Most of us had a dream when we were 5 that we no longer know what is or execute because somebody told us it wasn't practical. And later never actually, we're always going to do it later. I'll build a business later. I'll have children later. I'll go on vacation later. I'll build my dream house later. I got news for you. I don't know when later is on the calendar. I don't actually believe it will show up. And I've had a couple of experiences in my life where tomorrow's not a promise and later's not a promise, and you have no idea what's in store. And sometimes it's magically positive, but sometimes it really isn't. And so I have this intent that people get clear about their dreams and go execute them. I saw this fabulous Facebook post this morning we were talking about what if we all became experts in the impossible? And it's really trite, I know, but it's also totally possible, because our biggest problems are actually, our biggest roadblocks are ourselves. And so the don't await it, create it process is really plan it and go execute it. And for me, that's really important. I woke up one morning and my dad took me to school and I never saw him again. He dropped me and my brother off at school, and committed suicide. So in an instant, my very preppy, upper middle class, perfect little life with, sort of right out of Mad Men evaporated. And the lesson of that to me as at 14 was everything can change in an instant. And you don't wait. You tell people you love them and you go after what you want now. And part of my journey has been to say, okay, everything can change in an instant. Everything can change in an instant. So it doesn't have to be the negative form of that, right? In an instant, if you're clear about the dream, you'll see the opportunity and you actually get to have it. Otherwise, people walk away from an awful lot.
Yeah. What I really admire about this story, and I've known you for a little bit now, and we share a lot of similar life journeys, life experiences, is that we're able to take something that's so painful in that moment, something you can't even describe still in words unless you've lived it, and find a way to turn it into something positive to help people. Was that a natural process for you? Was that something that you just woke up saying, yes, this is what I can do now, turn this into something positive?
Yeah, sure.
Or really,
No.
What was that like? What was that like? Because it's an exercise. It is a will. It's very hard to describe. So I'm having a difficult time describing it right now.
I might approach problems that way now. At 13, at 14, I didn't have any of those skills. I was just mad. I was just point blank angry. Angry at him, angry at the other changes in my life, angry at my mom. I was just plain angry, and I was determined that the world wasn't going to knock me down. And it was funny because I think in my 20s when I stopped being so angry, I wasn't sure what would motivate me if I wasn't mad. No, I was just pure anger. Like, I'm just not, you watch. I am not going to fail. And so, no, I didn't get it at all. I was asked to give a speech to an emerging leaders group about 2 years ago, which really started this journey of telling my story, which I never used to do. Right. And I had this really good talk prepared. And she said, no, we want to hear about your leadership journey. Okay.
Oh, boy.
I have lived a pretty drama-filled life. And what I ended up starting that speech with is really, I think, the key to it for me, at least, which is that by the time you're 50 years old, you have probably lost a parent. Or someone you dearly loved. By the time you're 50 years old, you probably have known someone who suffered from mental illness or substance abuse. You probably have had some experience with violence. You've probably had some experience with life-threatening illness. Right? Mm-hmm. What happened that was different for me is I did all those things before I was 20.
Yeah.
So at 50, it's not all that big difference. I had a long time to heal, and I feel like all that stuff happened that was bad early so I could heal from it and do something with it. I have an uncle who died about 2 years ago, and a cousin who was sort of a big sister to me who's a decade older. And I remember her being around and being really close to her when my dad died, right? And then her dad dies 40 years later. She has a lot of years on that 13-year-old little girl, but nothing in her toolbox to deal with it. And I don't think as an adult losing a parent, it was any easier than it was for a kid. It was less disruptive, right, but it wasn't less painful. And so I feel like I just developed the capacity to support and work through those things early. And, one of the things about leaders is that it's lonely at the top, and it's lonely, they say it because it's true. You're sort of the only one. And we didn't talk about this earlier, but one of the impacts I get to have is I get to be on that journey with people. And I think all of this mess that happened early enables me to support them in a way that if I hadn't gone through all those things before, I wouldn't be able to do. And so, I think early trauma, as you've experienced and I've experienced, it does one of two things. You either come out stronger and you turn into a leader, or you get bogged down in it. And so a fair number of leaders I know have stories that aren't everybody's got their own drama, and that lots of them are not quite as dramatic as yours or mine, but they've got their own piece of it. And when you are upfront and alone, and I think it's also small business owners, you get to face everything. You either are able to run really, really fast and never look in the mirror, or every demon you've ever faced is going to be in your face. And learning to face those down and live with them, because they don't really leave, you just have to harness their energy differently, is part of the task. And so on the coaching side of my work, I get to help people with that, in part because of it. So I've used it well as a grown-up, but as a kid, I didn't know what I was doing. I was miserable.
Yeah, and you said a pretty key word that I also use a lot, which is capacity. You know, to have the capacity, the emotional capacity, to be able to be present with someone because you've either lived something similar, or that there's at least some level of empathy. Because you connect with people when you have compassion and sympathy, but it's a whole nother level when you can truly empathize with an emotion or a trigger, especially if you are working with leaders who've allowed themselves to have the role of being responsible. Because now they're not only processing for themselves, but they're processing for a whole team of people that they feel responsible for, whether it's at home, in the family, or whether it's inside the organization. And so being someone who can consult or coach at that level, I think the more life experiences, or at least in my opinion, in my experience, is we have a much easier, not that it's easy, a much easier time being able to hold that space and being able to also process it a little bit because of that experience of the capacity. Now, I do want to ask you a question about that. How do you, not necessarily convince a leader or convince a potential client to get out of their head and move into their heart and bring them together? You know, especially leaders who are constantly in their heads being asked to give me this analytical spiel on this, and, you know, what's the profitability of all of this? How do you get them to follow you into this mesh of heart and mind?
I never tell them that's what I'm doing, for starters. I want to answer that, but so if I don't go there, make sure I do. But I want to talk about empathy for a minute, because I'm struggling with that word a little bit these days, and it's not something we've ever talked about. But you know, empathy, yeah. But I think there's a step before empathy that's actually one that people who live in their heads get better, and that is it's really about being open. Right. One of the things, you go through all this stuff and you kind of learn that no one is just what they seem. Everybody spends a fair amount of their time acting, right? We all want to be seen in a particular way, so we don't always show all of ourselves. We're all little icebergs. And so it's really creating a space that says that I'm curious about who you actually are, and who I actually want to know is who you really are, not who you want me to think you are. And if I can create a space that's open, then the empathy happens because I get you. Right. And it really is about getting it. And that creates the space to actually teach from there, right? So sometimes it's simply demonstrating that I get it. People relax, get comfortable, feel more safe. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's they get stuck, and the head questions are not getting at it. Right. So when I'm sitting with a type A person who's telling me that they didn't do their homework again, and that they're beating themselves up, first we want to put the whip down. And the second question is, when a type A person who is driven and always achieves and isn't doing their homework, it is not a problem in their head. And it's not actually a problem on their calendar. So what is it? And if I can introduce it in that way, I'm sort of like, well, let's talk about what's going to happen if you get this done. What's that going to mean for you? What does it actually feel like? And I often will do a meditation where I take people through 5 senses, and then we talk about what does it feel like in your gut. Your gut's never wrong. So sometimes it's easy because just creating a safe space is enough, and other times they might have to be frustrated enough to try something different. Right.
Well, that kind of answered the second question too. Yeah. How do you get them to move from head to heart, right? You ask them to
head's not working, let's try something else.
Right, to do something different. Well, you like working a lot one-on-one, but you also love group settings. You love group settings. I know this about you. You love being able to collaborate and do events and host workshops and partner up with people. So share a little bit about the experience of hosting events and what has been some of the successes, what have been some of the challenges, and then you have something coming up that you're planning as well. I want to make sure that we touch upon that.
Lots of really good questions in there. So I'm someone who, when faced with mess, throws a party. It's really easy. I don't understand why people think having a party is hard. You get some good food and some good beverages, and you invite good friends, and you put on good music, and really after that, it's fine. So I lived in an apartment for 25 years, and then I got a house. It has a garden. It has dirt. I don't do dirt. So I invited my friends over who like to garden, and I made dinner. When my mom got sick and I had to clean out her house.
Good strategy.
Right? You know, I had to clean out her house. All the stuff got dumped in my living room and I was paralyzed by it. And so I invited girlfriends that I felt safe being a mess in front of. And I brought out wine and chocolate. And together we went through my mother's stuff because if it was left to me, it was never going to happen. So I had a party. So there's a part of me that's sort of just kind of who I am. I also had the opportunity to, in some of my contracting work, host a gazillion events. So, I mean, there was a 6-month period where in 26 weeks, my team threw 20 events. So I'm not uncomfortable with a hotel contract, and I'm not, and I've always done them for other people. And then about a year ago, I was like, I think I want to have my own. So I held the first Don't Await It, Create It live event last January. 57 leaders from all walks of life, all sectors, all women. The hotel kept offering me things like the wine bar for a reception and a hot chocolate bar to make up for having to move around for a wedding, and that sounded like women, and so I ended up doing a women's event, one of the coolest things I've ever done. Women are social, women leaders have no peers. This gave them a room full of peers, and it also gave them a room full of peers in other sectors. So they got input from people from a different walk of life. And the way the Don't Await It, Create It process works is it's fairly interactive. You're working on a plan, but you're sharing that plan with others. So it created it's been really fun to watch the relationships bloom from that event. The participants themselves said they wanted to do it again. They said they wanted to do it again here, even though it's cold in January. And they said they wanted to do it in January, that it was a great way to start the year. So I am already planning for the Martin Luther King weekend this year, probably in DC, certainly metro accessible, Friday, Saturday, Sunday into the long weekend. Don't Await It, Create It.
That's great.
Women for 2015, and guys, I'm trying to figure out what to do for you. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't pay attention, because certainly the newsletter and the tips are for you, but I think there's some things that women need that are different, that they need their own space for some things. And so that's the plan, and trying to cook up some cool new stuff to add.
That's great.
From last year.
How do you find time to process information? And you just said something very, very key. You said, female executives, leaders, don't necessarily always have peers, right? And then you talked about being an entrepreneur and how lonely it is, and female, entrepreneur, both those together, not having peers, feeling, alone. How do you balance that? Where do you go to get support?
Really interesting question. At first, there are a couple of men who are incredible entrepreneurs themselves who encouraged me, who are my friends and colleagues, and they are a place I went. I now work with a coach out of Denver who specifically targets women leaders. So I've gotten a tribe of colleagues from that. And I have been really, really lucky. I mean, so one of the things that happens when you have a crazy, messy family is you get good at building relationships with other people. So I have long-standing, deep friendships. The hard part is actually the truth-telling, right? It's the hard part is being honest about what scares you. The hard part is being vulnerable and the hard part, and I would say the other, two questions in there that I want to get to. So much to say.
It's okay. We have plenty of time. I'll let you know when it's time to go.
Yeah, no, I know. So one piece is the entrepreneur piece. Entrepreneurs are a special breed. working with a couple of our friends on something called Kick Fanny to help entrepreneurs get resources they need. Doesn't cure the lonely piece, but at least you find other people who are doing it. People who have always gone to a job where the revenue generating side of it was someone else's responsibility have a very different perception of what that responsibility is than those of us who are responsible for everybody else's living. And where the boss is you. And there's a whole set of skills that we have to develop about when you turn it on, when you turn it off, all of those things. And I do think that women have small businesses are predominantly started by women, but most of them are struggling. So finding successful small business partners is an important piece of it. And on the women leadership piece, the problem most of us face is that all the women we know who are our peers hired us, compete with us, and work for us. And there just aren't enough of us yet. And so one of the things that's fun about the created event is that it's a room full of people who are leading. And what has been fun, and I probably would have predicted but didn't really know, is that they've become a community. So they're hiring each other. They're, because I did the event here and I live here, I kind of know what's going on with it. And people built relationships to do that. So I guess the one-word answer is relationship.
All that to say relationships.
All that to say it's building relationships. And if you sit in a closet by yourself, you're going to be lonely.
Yeah. Speaking of relationships and connection and networking and women, how do you think we can not resolve but make better women working together? And less competition, more collaboration. What do you think might be some key things to discuss? Because it's such a curious thing, right, around women not always banding together and supporting each other at a level where it's totally possible. It's one of those impossible things that is totally possible. What's your take on that?
Probably a little different than what a lot of people think. If you build genuine relationships, and that actually requires you to be genuine, right, it's a little harder to get messed up. Number one. Number two, I think the myth of the every woman I know knows a woman who, quote unquote, screwed her over. And they tell themselves that as a story. It's a story. One person did something you didn't like and they happen to be female. And I don't mean to diss bad bosses, we all have had them, or bad colleagues, but I don't think it's a gender-based problem, number one. Number two, women have we grew up in the same culture as the men we work with that says strong, decisive, committed women are aggressors and unpleasant, and right, we adopt the same piece. So we kind of need to ask ourselves some questions about, are we applying the double standard ourselves? And I actually, at the end of the day, I know it's going to sound Pollyanna, but authenticity wins. I'm trying to come up with an analogy that works. It's the anonymity of the internet enables people to insult each other in ways they never would face to face. Why? Because they don't actually have a relationship with the person they're insulting. Right. They actually have a relationship with that person, they aren't going to do it. They aren't going to do it. And so if you build real relationships, then those things happen at a much lower rate, number one. Number two, there are people in the world who are negative and downers. There are. I do my best to surround myself with people who aren't in that place. Sometimes it is about finding new friends. And it's about getting out of the business of remaking everybody. But I don't buy this myth that women are just out to get each other, because that's just not been my experience. And I've been in enough different places and I've been reasonably successful. One last piece about that is women also have to stop treating relationships like dating. And here's the example. I have two clients who have been partners on projects and also found themselves in competition with each other for a project. And I think we need to start treating things like getting a job and not like dating. And here's the difference. One of those people looks at it like, at least somebody good's going to get the gig. I'm competing, you're competing. They get to decide one of us is going to get it, and we're going to do great work. The other one is like, I can't believe they competed over that work because it was supposed to be mine. No, it's not. It's a business decision. Somebody else is deciding. They didn't steal your boyfriend. You both applied for a job, and at least one of you is going to get it.
Right.
And I think women sometimes apply that dating standard to what happens at work. And it doesn't work very well in the dating world either, but it really can't apply at work.
Yeah. Well, so much of your work is being able to take a leader through the process of putting their heads and their hearts together and being present in the body. What do you do for that type of inspiration? Like, are there tips and ideas around how you do it? Do you do yoga? Is it exercise? Is it journaling? What's your mechanism for being able to have this healthy, I don't know if balance is the right word, but where you feel centered?
So I have to tell you, I actually like my life. There's some things I should do more of. Okay. I should exercise. Apparently I don't want to, or I would be doing it. So I do a little. My head fake is that I will listen to books on tape to go do it. Well, because I'll walk to do that, and it's about being away from the computer and not doing other things while I'm listening, and I'll do it for that. But if I have to walk because I'm supposed to go walk now, never going to happen. So the myth of me having it all together needs to go out the window immediately. I also love ice cream, and also not healthy. But I do meditate every day. I do take time to get centered every day. I do envision my day before it starts. I do make sure I have fun. So I may add in when my mom got sick and I was doing the trek to doctor's offices and nursing homes and all the rest of it. I refused to give up fun. Now I gave up some sleep, but I didn't give up fun. Because joy is what feeds our souls. And if you never fill yourself up, you have nothing to give. So it is about filling yourself up and creating. I'm not a big fan of balance because we can balance off. What I want is people to be joyful. I want people to get up in the morning excited about what they're going to do for the day and come home delighted to tell the story of it. And balance has very different meaning for different people. So I'm not a big fan of that. If I had one tip, it's really easy, and it's counted breath work. Great for anxiety, great to calm down, great to get centered. So most of the people I work with are really smart, and their brains move really, really fast. They move faster than I talk, not easy. And slowing down is really hard. And so I have one friend who tells a story about how she can't do yoga and she can't meditate, and how when they had to lay on their mats and be quiet in order to be still, she tried to name all of the Supreme Court justices and cabinet secretaries so she wouldn't disturb people, right? Okay, so what I like to do is give your brain something to do while you're getting quiet, right. And it's counting. And almost everybody I know can count to 4. And so it really is, it's breathing in deep into your belly to a count of 4, holding it for a count of 4, exhaling for a count of 4, holding it for a count of 4, and repeat. And just having to count will distract you enough to calm down.
Where did you learn that technique? Do you remember?
Some wellness book I read years ago. I don't think that Andrew Weil has a much more complicated scheme, so it's not that. I don't remember, quite honestly, but but I practice it, and if I'm too in my head and I'm like, oh, I got to go write that thing down while I'm trying, for 5 minutes you can stop, and if I have to do that, that's enough.
Any final thoughts or tips for leaders out there today around just life in general, life as a leader? Some of the pitfalls that we have as a leader that they could easily avoid by paying attention to where they are, being present, etc. What are some thoughts on that?
I would like to cure executive fraud. And what I mean by that is the number of people who are like, they get a great new leadership position and they don't think they're really that, so they start acting as if they have the job, right? And I think lots of us have been in that spot. And there's one thing about faking it till you make it. There's another that you think you're a fake. I have news for you guys. We all tell everybody who we are, even when we don't mean to. They actually hired you. They didn't hire you pretending to do the job. They hired you. And they probably are more aware of who you are than you think. And so if we can just save people all the time it takes to pretend to be who we are and just actually be us in that job, I think we'd cure a lot of the balance problem, because it's incredibly exhausting to constantly anticipate who people think, how you're going to act like who people think you're supposed to be.
Why is that so hard for us as human beings, just to be who we are? What are some of the triggers that, kind of make us believe that we have to always pretend or put our best foot forward? What does that even really mean?
So I don't think it's only women who do it, but there's kind of a gendered example. When you decide that success is 100%, you're going to fail. And so you run around constantly afraid of not getting 100%. And I think women do that all the time. We think we have to be perfect everywhere. And I'm not sure any of us have to be perfect anywhere. And I think men are much better at, well, I do it pretty well. I'm going to do it. And there's some research that sort of says that women believe they have to have all of the traits in order to apply for the next promotion. That they already have to have all the traits that promotion requires. Where guys are much better at understanding, I'm not in charge here. I've got most of it. Let's see. Right. You never know who's going to apply. So I've got 2/3 of the things. Let's see if it's good enough. And I think we do that in the job. So I don't think it's only women that have the perfect problem, but I think a lot of it is the perfect problem.
Gosh, we have so many different points to touch upon, and we could go on forever and ever and ever. And I would like for you to come back, to come on the show. But first, before we leave, how can people learn more about you, connect with you, get in touch with you, hire you, whatever? How can they find you?
Well, I am going to make the assumption that by the time the show actually airs, we're much closer to the created event. But we're not quite there yet, so I don't have a website for that. What I would suggest people do is email me, and I made it really easy. You don't have to understand my last name. Julie at iLeadstrategies.com, or look me up on the internet, on LinkedIn, because both places will have the event. But if you just shoot me an email, I'll make sure you get on the list.
That's great. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate your insights. Lots of great nuggets. I hope people are taking notes and learning more about, being a better leader, or maybe they know some leaders that they can kind of point your way. So thanks for sharing with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been really fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you, everyone, for joining us again on another episode of Tea with Mali, and we will see you next time.